Welcome to this kind of tutorial or video on track meet essentials. So what we're going to do is go through these with you, and we'll go through these with you in person, but if you were gone or if you need a refresher, we're going to have you watch this video. Now, the very first thing we want you to know when you are in track, if you are at an away meet, what you do, and if you're going to leave with your parents when your events are done, you must sign out. So we'll let you know what coach you have to sign out with, because it'll just be one coach that'll have the sign out sheet. You must sign out. So your parents need to go to this coach and they're going to need to sign their name. You don't just go to the coach and say, hey, coach, I'm leaving. You must sign out. And the reason for this is we need to know that you actually left with your parents. Even if we talk to your parents and we know your parents were there, we don't know if your parents left and you just walked off, if someone took you. So what happens if you're not accounted for at the end of the night? We have to sit there on our buses. We have to try and get in contact with you. And I've had some years where we've had to wait for half an hour. So every single person on the bus has to wait for half an hour till we can get a hold of your parents, or we call the principals. And a lot of times the principals will just tell us to call 911 and report you as missing. And that way we've covered all of our bases. We don't know for sure if you're with your parents. So to relieve all this headache, just make sure you sign out. Now, your parents must sign you out. If you are going to go home with a different set of parents, we need to have a note in advance that your parents are saying it's okay. So if you had a note and you brought that note to us and it said, please let my child go home with so-and-so, that would be fine. And then we'll mark that. Then they need to sign you out. So you still can't just leave, because then we'd have to call them to see where you are. But that parent would sign you out and their child out if you're going to go with them. Now, orderly events. We love you all, but we will get annoyed if we're trying to coach the hurdles, or we're trying to coach the discus or the high jump, and we have students coming up to us every 30 seconds. What event is next? What event is next? What event is next? Now, this order of events was on the sheet that we handed out at the meeting. So the hurdles go first, then the 100-meter dash, then the mile, then the 4x2 relay, followed by the 400-meter dash, the 4x1, the 800-meter, the 200-meter, and the 4x4. Typically, girls go first. I've never seen an event or a track meet where the girls didn't go first. And typically, so it'd be 7th grade girls, 8th grade girls, then 7th grade boys, then 8th grade boys. So the best thing you can do is memorize this order. And the reason why it's important, if you're at a field event and you know they're running a 100-meter dash and you have to be there for the mile, you know approximately when you need to be there. So every year we'll have people say, well, I missed my race. I didn't know when it was. I thought it was later. And we would just tell the students, look, if they're running the mile and you're supposed to be in a 4x2, you know that's the next relay, or you know that's the next event. You should have been over there. You should have been getting in contact with the rest of the relay. Or if you're in the 200 and they're running the 800, you knew your race was next. So make sure you're there. We're not going to necessarily accept excuses that I didn't know or I didn't hear the calls. We'll explain what the calls are next. So that's those events. The field events, there is no specific order. A lot of times long jump, well, it depends. Some places have two long jump pits. They'll have a boys pit and a girls pit. And typically there is just you stand in line and you take your jumps when you get to the front of the line. High jump is different. High jumps, and sometimes they start with boys, sometimes they start with girls. Usually it's the 7th graders followed by the 8th graders. So they flip-flop. And you'll find out when you get to these places. But in the high jump, everybody jumps to first height, and then if you make it, then they go through everybody again. So it's very important to know if you're in a high jump, you got to be there as much as possible. If you're out at the concession stand buying concessions and they call your name and you're not there, everybody has to wait until you get back. So make sure you're there. And shot disc, again, it switches, it varies from place to place who throws first. Sometimes it's girls, sometimes it's boys. There is no set rule with that. So obviously, if the boys are throwing shot, typically the girls will do discus and they'll flip-flop. So it's never typically both boys doing shot and discus. Usually they flip-flop with that. Now, calls is very important. So you're going to hear this. So if you are new to track, the first call means there's about 15 minutes. The second call means there's about 10 minutes before your race. And the third call, or they might say the final call, that means you need to be there now if you're not already there. So now you have to keep these calls in mind. We've been to some track meets where they'll make the final call and they're still 15 minutes away from running an event. That can be very frustrating because if you're doing field events, you're sitting there or you're standing there and you're waiting for your race and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. A lot of times as the high jump coach, I'll come and pull you out and say, hey, look, go get another jump in, then you can come back. Other places are late on their calls and they'll say first call, second call, third call, and boom, you go there and you're going to be running that race pretty quickly. So make sure you listen to calls. There are some places, or if it's really windy, you might not be able to hear the calls very well. But I tell you what, if you know the order of events, you can see what events are happening, and you should know approximately when your event is going to be and if you should be over there. So make sure you listen to the calls. Again, if they get the second call, you're probably going to want to leave your field event and get there. Now, if you are throwing shot, if you are throwing discus, if you are high jumping and you're waiting for your, especially in high jump, if you're waiting, say, at 4.8, you can always tell the person, you know, I've got to go run the 200. Can I jump before I leave? Or they just called the 100. Can I throw the shot before I leave? And sometimes they'll let you quick, you know, button line and throw or jump or do one of those things before you leave. So you can always ask. Now, long jump, if there's 20 people aligned, they're probably not going to ask you. Now, speaking of field events, a lot of times they'll say, okay, field events, you have 1 hour and 15 minutes to get your throws in. So you also have to watch the time. So if you say, oh, I have 1 hour and 15 minutes, I'll go watch so-and-so run a race. I'm going to go to the concession stand. I'm going to go to the bathroom. All of a sudden, you only have 15 minutes left, and then they call you for a running event. What do? Well, you just wasted an hour, and now you have 15 minutes, and you have to do both. So we've had people get disqualified because they have 1 hour and 15 minutes to get a throw in or a jump in, and they're nowhere to be found. So they waited and waited and waited, and all of a sudden, they couldn't get it in. So make sure you get your jumps in as soon as possible and your throws in as soon as possible. Now, in shot and disc, a lot of times they will call you. They don't usually just let anybody come up. They'll call so-and-so from Baraboo, and then they'll go in order for those. Long jumps, usually an open pit, though. Now, talk about checking in, checking out. Whenever you're in a running event or a field event, when you go to the places where you need to check in, they will, you know, usually at the beginning they'll call names, or you can go up there and say, I'd like to check in, so-and-so from Baraboo. Now, typically in track, they'll check you in up where the 100 starts, because that's where the 100 will start. That's where the 110 hurdle or the 100 hurdles will start. That's where the 100-meter dash will start. And a lot of times they check you in there, and then you walk down to the starting line for the relays and for the mile and the 800. So make sure you check in, especially for the running events, because if you didn't check in, they won't know you're there. They'll just scratch you. Field events, too, make sure you check in. Let them know you're there. You know, so-and-so from Baraboo checking in. Usually, when you do a running event, they'll actually assign you a lane as well. So if you're doing 100, they'll say, so-and-so from Baraboo, you're in lane 2. So-and-so from Mount Horeb, you're in lane 3. So make sure you listen to that as well. Now, checking out is just as important. This is for field events only. So if you're, say, throwing a shot and you're next in line and all of a sudden they call your event, you can go up to the person and say, you know, this is so-and-so from Baraboo. I need to check out. I need to be running the 200, so I need to go over there and run. And then that way they'll know that you're gone and you're not just skipping, and then you can throw when you get back. This is very, very important in the high jump. They need to know if you're checking out so they know to wait for you. Now, this is sometimes where that person will look at the race and they'll look at you and they'll say, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you get a jump in? And anytime you can get a jump in before you run is great. Because imagine if you had to run to 400, your legs are tired. Then when you get back to the high jump, do you really want to jump right away? Well, you'll have to. So that's why it's important, if you know you have to check out, to go to the person and say, you know, hey, I'm so-and-so from Baraboo. I need to check out soon. Can I please get my jumps in before I leave? And they might be able to let you get the jumps in before you leave. That's much better than coming back. We've had lots of athletes over the years come back with their legs really tired, and then they can't make the height, where they easily could have made it if they would have jumped before. And that's just luck at, you know, how fast it's going and what races you're in, if your legs are going to be jello afterwards or not. So make sure you check out. Relays. Now, the first runner in each relay is in charge of getting the baton. The batons are going to be in the yellow, it looks like a yellow toolbox. The last runner is in charge of putting the batons back. Now, make sure that you do this. If we have, you know, we could have multiple teams running relays. If no one did this, we would be out of relay or out of batons by the end of the race. And we've had some situations where we're really low, and that's because people had batons, they didn't put them back, they put them in their own bags. Or if you're in a 4x4 and you pull a baton out at the beginning of the race, what are people going to use for the 4x2 and the 4x1? So make sure you put it back. Plus, make sure they all get back. As a team, we run if we're missing batons. And last year, we did lose one for the first time in a long time. Now, make sure you get to your locations to check in. How many of you remember the meet last year? I know there was a group of 7th graders that were struggling. I went to them and said, okay, make sure you get over here. Your relay is going to start. Your relay is going to start. And they just kept walking. They didn't jog over there, and we barely made this race. If I wouldn't have been over there pushing them, not literally pushing them, but saying, you got to go, speed up, get over there, check in, they would have missed the race. That's 4 different people, I don't know. I don't know what happened with it. I don't know if they didn't want to run it. So make sure you're mindful of this. Make sure the 4 of you get together and make sure you're there. If just one person misses it, your whole team gets disqualified. So again, make sure you're mindful of your relays and getting your relays together beforehand. Now, it says here, be sure to check in and make sure you have time to stretch. Everybody should stretch. We're going to stretch together once as a team, but you're probably going to have to stretch 4 or 5 times. If it's a really cold night, you might even have to stretch more. Before every high jump, you might want to stretch out a little bit. Before each throw the shot put, before each time you run. Take 5 minutes to stretch out so you don't pull anything. Now, this gets to some important stuff. Concessions. Not all locations have concessions. Some do, some don't. We've had some that have had concessions one year, but they didn't have it the next year. So we could tell you, and we probably will say, you know, last year they had concessions, but make sure, if you want, so you can bring money, but make sure you always have plenty of liquids to stay hydrated, and maybe a snack or 2 to eat till you can get home. So make sure you do this. We've had lots of people over the years, oh, I'm so thirsty, oh, I'm hungry. Because remember, we may not get back till 7:30, 8 o'clock at night if you're riding the buses. And make sure you bring healthy drinks and healthy snacks. So don't bring soda and chips and then have you barf midway through the race. Now, we also need you to dress for the weather. If it's going to be cold, bring layers. If it's going to be wet, make sure you have layers. Maybe have some waterproof clothing, and maybe have some warm, dry clothing to put on afterwards. Even if it's just, you know, a shirt or something to put on over some of the wet material, or you can go into the bathrooms and change before you get on the bus. That way you're not going to be dripping with water, and really, if it's really cold, because some of the early meets are going to be cold, we don't want you to get sick that way, just because you've been cold and you don't have spare clothing. Remember, sometimes if you do the long jump, your socks and your shoes get completely, you know, covered with sand. Sometimes it's nice to have a spare set of socks that you can take off, put on if you have to run a race. Otherwise, you know, that may be something that irritates you as well, and you can't run as quickly because there's sand in your shoe. Obviously, you can clean it out the best you can, but you might not be able to get it all out. And the last thing I want to talk about with meets is make sure you sign out if you are leaving away from an away meet with your parents. Again, this is huge. You must sign out. If you don't sign out, you may not be coming with us to the next meet. If it happens twice, you may not be on the team anymore, because this is our most serious team violation. This is our most serious team violation. So again, if you have any questions, make sure you ask prior to a meet. And if we ask you to watch this, hopefully you watched it and you know what's going on. Thanks. Bye.